Welcome back to another episode of Ashley and Katrina's Infinite Revenue Playlist.
This episode is special, don't you
Very
think?
special because it is about topics that are relevant to anyone, but it's special because we are celebrating a friend of ours who has decided to venture out on her own and start her own business. She finally quit her 9-to-5 and she is fully leaning into her new business, which is Uncapped. And that is our friend Zoya Segelbacher.
Yes, and Zoya is full entrepreneur mode now, which is awesome. And for those of you that don't know our backstory, Katrina and I met in the Gong Women in Revenue meetup. We were randomly connected. We started co-hosting Gong's Women in Revenue meetup together. So Zoya was one of our supports for that group from Gong. So Zoya just recently quit that job at Gong to go on and do her own thing, which is very exciting. What Zoya is doing, I think it's very closely related to what she was most recently doing at Gong, which is enablement. She has started a community really aiming to help people break into tech or to help people in SDR AE roles get better at what they're doing.
Almost a full circle moment, in my opinion, because we all met in a community and fostered relationships and have all started things from this community. And a big core part of Zoya's company, Uncapped, is not just like providing training and resources to people that want to break into tech and also just refine their sales skills and get better, but she's also creating a community amongst the people that go through her programs. So it's just really cool to see that like she started off in the community and Gong with us, and we went off and started a podcast, and she went off and started her own company. So it's really exciting that we got to reconnect with her on that.
And we talked a lot with Zoya on this episode about what it took to get her feeling comfortable enough to branch out like this, and then what that experience as a woman entrepreneur has been. And I think that that's really important for us to touch on.
We've talked with a lot of women who are in leadership roles that either started their own company, become CEOs, CROs, CMOs, etc. And a lot of them talked about how, women do face a unique set of trials when it comes to starting your own company, because you don't fit the norm in terms of like what a VC is looking for a founder. Just looking at data, right? Nothing to do with the fact that a VC is literally looking at you and saying, ew, you're a woman. That's not what's happening. It's just you don't fit the pattern, right, that they've made over years and years of investments. And so they look at women as risks, right? Because it is new territory. But what Zoya talked about that I thought that was super interesting that no one else talked about was more of like the mindset or the way women have to think that might be slightly different than a man when they go and start their own company. And we talked a lot about just branding, right? Which sounds really silly, but both you and I and Zoya had the same experience of having to iterate the name and the colors of our brand multiple times, thinking to ourselves, like, is this too girly? Right? Will a man look at this and take us seriously if they see this brand pop up in their feed or in an ad? And I'm not sure that all men think that way too. They're not thinking, is this too manly for a woman?
Yeah. One of the things Zoya brought up on our talk with her was her decks and how she has some pink included in the branding, and how she was about to have a man come in and speak in one of her cohorts or one of her classes for Uncapped. And she was concerned about whether or not this man would be okay with there being a little bit of pink in the deck. And I love that she checked herself and was like, no, he can deal. Pink is not a bad color. It's fine.
It's funny also, though, that we're having these conversations because I don't think they happen the other way around, right? I don't think that somebody puts out a new sales podcast and thinks, will this appeal to, like, you know what I mean? They're just like, this is what they all look like. Like, this sells. This is great.
And so that definitely, I know we chimed in when she said that, resonated with our experience of picking our logo, our ideas. And I think we went back and forth and said the exact words, is this too pink? Often when we were coming up with, and our branding does have pink and so does hers, but the idea that it could
I remember our first iteration of the logo was completely pink and like different shades of pink. And I was all in and you were like, I think it's too girly.
Well, and I don't have a problem with girly. Girly is great. But we do, like for us, it is a podcast about elevating the voices of women. We want people who are not women to listen to this podcast because we want them to understand the experience that we go through, that our guests go through. We want them to feel compelled to watch it. And we were a little, or listen, I was a little concerned that if it was so pink and branded in that way, a man would just automatically skip over it.
I think that's a valid concern, and it plays very well into the same thought process that any woman starting their own company thinks about when they pick their name or their logo or whatever it might be. I don't know about you, but I've noticed in general that my feed and network is filled with more and more women that are starting their own companies, like whether it's consulting for companies based on the job that they've held for somewhat years, or just starting a new company for a different product, for an idea they have. But a trend that I feel like I'm seeing is a lot of these women are starting their own companies because it's the only way that they can obtain a leadership role. And I'm curious if you think that that's what the sense that I get, but I'm curious if you have a different perspective.
I think it's a couple things. That's definitely part of it. And I know you and I have talked about starting more than just this podcast. And when it happens, you'll hear it here first. But I think for us, part of that reason is because I have gone through a lot of situations where I was primed for promotion and didn't get it. And it's been very hard for me to organically move up the ranks in the traditional sales ladder climbing sense. So yeah, it'd be a lot easier for me to get to the C level if I start my own thing, right? So I personally think that's absolutely part of it. I also think that people like Zoya are learning out loud. They're getting comfortable sharing who they are, what they're doing. They're getting comfortable being out there and being themselves. And like Zoya is a woman of color as well. She's biracial, as just being a woman. Like just being a woman is not really like a thing, but she is inspiring people in a lot of different ways to see something that doesn't look the way that we've always seen founders as these white dudes who are young and all that fun stuff. So all that to say, I think more women are seeing more women starting things. And so we're getting that aha moment of why can't I? Or yes, I can do it too, because someone like Zoya is doing it and we're seeing her do it really well.
And a big part of progressing your career a lot of times is tied to enablement, learning, training, and mentorship. So it's really cool that Zoya's company is all about helping people, enabling them to become better sellers, right? So like she's paying it back by making her entire product making people better at their jobs, right? So hopefully that helps them either get their foot in the door or get a nice promotion internally.
Yeah. And she's coming from a company that she did enablement at for a long time, Gong, that is known for being a world-class sales organization. So she has the chops to back it up. She went to Cornell. Like she knows what she's doing. She's not just somebody coming off the street deciding to start a company about enablement that doesn't know what they're doing, which I've seen a few of too. So,
which is funny that you mentioned that, because obviously imposter syndrome is something that plagues a lot of people in general, but especially I think women in the tech and revenue space. Like almost every guest we've ever had on has said something about imposter syndrome. And we didn't talk about this on the podcast. I had this conversation on the side with Zoya, and she's been working on Uncapped for a while on the side, alongside her 9 to 5 at Gong. But what made her actually take the leap and start the company and fully lean into it as her full-time job was she got into an Uber ride at one point and struck up a conversation with the driver, who somehow landed on the topic of saying like, oh, I one time interviewed for a tech sales job. And I went really far, but I didn't get it. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, did you interview around at other places or what happened? He goes, no, just there wasn't a lot of resources out there. And I didn't really know anyone in tech. And, I went through a lot of effort for that one interview and I didn't get it. And I felt like it wasn't worth it. And she said in that moment when she was having a complete stranger was telling her that what she's building was needed, she was like, I then had the validation of like, oh, what I'm doing is important, it matters, and it will actually help people, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. And there's room for everyone at the table as far as founders go. Like, I think specifically people who are on that same mission that Zoya is, to help other people break into tech or help maybe an SDR get into an AE role or something like that. There is no shortage of people who need help. And so I love seeing companies like this come up and start working towards that goal. And I think one thing I want our listeners to take away is like, just because Zoya is doing it, just because there's other companies out there doing these things that you want to do, doesn't mean there's not room for more. And I just love that Zoya is very supportive of other women who are entrepreneurs. She's very supportive of other women podcasters like us. And I think if we can give people like a piece of inspiration from this episode, it's that there's a lot of problems out there that need to be solved, and we can all found something.
And as you said, there's always room for people at the table, right? You can start your own company all about enabling reps to be better sellers. I think that's a really great takeaway. And I think it'd be good to call out that Zoya was recently named one of the 50 next creators on Rev Genius's 50 next list. So congrats to Zoya on that. So she's doing a lot. She also launched her podcast called Rep Matters a couple months ago. She launched her company, Uncapped. She made this list. So Zoya's just crushing it. And she's a fantastic role model, in my opinion, to any other ladies in the revenue space.
Yes, we want to watch Zoya soar.
With that said, listen to Zoya's full episode on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever you listen to your podcast. It's a good one. You'll learn about all things sales enablement and training. You'll learn about her new company, Uncapped, and of course, get a lot of inspiration for potentially starting your own.